how are you approaching that at Expedia?
Yeah, we've approached it a few different ways. So I'm so glad you asked about this because my little ears were tingling around this.
How do you emphasize those kind of skills in the work that you have to do?
I don't even have a choice. Well, I would probably fail if I didn't because I deal with a multicultural group. I ask a lot of questions because I'm not an expert in the different cultures that I'm working with, but I'm a listener and I'm a learner.
So I think first and foremost, it's community. Where do you go when your boss calls you up and says, hey, we've never done this before, but I want you to take a crack at creating this strategy? That's where we get a lot of people reaching out to us saying, do you know anyone that's an expert in this? Or has anyone dealt with the same issue?
You were the chapter president through COVID. You saw that shrinking and attrition and all that you've been rebuilding from since then. What did that experience teach you?
I think it's terribly important to insist on individual values.
Learning Culture Podcast.
Initiative, creation, all these things which we value. It's now possible to make organizations on a larger scale than was ever possible before.
Learning Culture Podcast.
Teach people to analyze the kind of things that are said to them.
Callan, Jen, thank you so much for joining me.
Happy to be here.
Yeah.
Excited to be here, yeah.
How do you, okay, actually, Callan, let me start with you. You are the current chapter president for the New York chapter of ATD.
Yes.
How does it feel to be at this event? What does this event mean to the association?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. Well, so first of all, we'll get all the normal answers out of the way. Networking, great connections, amazing vendors. Yes, we already know that. Amazing stuff. For ATD NYC, and Jen was our past president last year, 2 years ago, she was the president. We've made amazing strides recently in rebuilding our board. The pandemic had done, as it did with almost every business, it also impacted nonprofits and communities really, really heavily, which Jen led through that. So last year was a huge rebuilding year for us. This year we have quadrupled our board size. We have so many volunteers and people that are really passionate about giving back to the community, about learning the hot, sexy new things that are happening in L&D. So I think beyond connecting with vendors, it's about coming together and co-creating awesome ideas, being able to take it back to our workplaces, back to our community, and bringing it to life. So I'm feeling like there's a lot of positive, innovative energy. So that's what I'm seeing is the biggest impact of the conference so far.
That's awesome. And is it an opportunity for you also to connect with people at other chapters?
Absolutely.
A big part of it?
Yeah, we usually have our, it's called ALC, so our chapter presidents conference that happens the 2 days before ATD. So first we connect with all the leaders within the chapters, and then we're able to go out and talk with vendors, talk with companies. And there's just so much talent in ATD, from the local chapter level, from the national level, it's incredible.
Yeah. I guess I'd love to hear your take. Actually, no, let me come to you, Jen, because I feel like I'm leaving you, cold shouldering you a bit here.
I know.
I'm going to come back to this because I want to spend a little bit of time talking about ATD and then, get into some of the other stuff as well that you guys do. Because you do have jobs outside of ATD, right?
No.
Because we forget. Yeah.
You were the chapter president through COVID, right? And so you saw that shrinking and attrition and all that you've been rebuilding from since then. What did that experience teach you?
To meet people where they are, and I can elaborate a little bit more, the volunteers that make up the board and the members, because there was a lot of fear and a lot of uncertainty. And we immediately had to switch to virtual everything. That meant that everybody was switching to virtual everything, and now we had this crazy competition. Everything went free all of a sudden. I don't know about you, but I could find talent development education for free 24/7 if I wanted to. So now what made us different, right? And we lost members, we lost attendance, and it made us realize, let's stop and not just keep doing what we're doing, which obviously we changed and we moved virtual, but we also had to pause and say, we've got less people, we've got less members, and we've got less people attending our programs, and we're trying to produce the same amount. So it was a reflective moment. You know, we are New York City, so we have a reputation. When we, I don't know if you experience this, but whenever I'm in the community and you say you're from the New York City chapter, they're like, oh, wow. So we feel like we have this burden to live up to that standard. So I had to kind of swallow that a little bit and put that aside and just adapt as best as we could.
Yeah. And I think we'll talk a lot more about adapting, and you're both in the travel industry, so that's another huge impact there as well, which we'll get to. But I guess what did it teach you about community? Like when you talk about co-creating, like being here and live and co-creating, right? That community is such a key part of a community. What did it teach you about what the value of ATD was when you couldn't get together anymore?
Well, I felt people were more vulnerable and willing to show that side of themselves during COVID, because it was nobody knew how to react. It was one of those scenarios where there was no playbook for it. So more honest and authentic conversations could be had. I could call other chapters, I could call other TD professionals, I could call national and say, we don't know what to do. Like, how are you navigating this? And a lot of times we figured it out together, and we were making it up. We were making completely new playbooks, and that was okay. And it brought people closer together. I mean, I was consulting at this earlier in COVID as well, and I found myself creating a COVID plan. Nobody knew how to create a COVID plan, right? The government was telling us different things according to the day, what was safe and what wasn't safe. So it was, I think, in a way, as fearful as everybody was, there was a side that was bringing people closer together.
Yeah. And just to go back to that point about planning as well, do you look at planning differently now, like going through that experience?
Yeah, definitely. We're still looking at meeting people where they are. When I was president, we were at the tail end of COVID. We wanted to maybe start in person again. We were polling our community. And it wasn't just that, it was, where can we hold it? Because places that often donated their space were saying, oh, well, we're not allowing people into our space yet. So we're still, I think, even more of a focus on our community, and that's what we're supposed to be doing already, but even more so, like really listening to what does our community need. And that's Callan's brought us like a lot further there when she created our mission with the board for this year. So
yeah. So let's talk a little bit about that, and maybe this will like come out of the mission that you're working towards. But like, what role would you describe? But you're both also practitioners, right? And an association like ATD has a role to play for practitioners. How would you describe what that role is now?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think something else to also add on from Jen, the other really big impact that COVID had was not only did we lose members, did we lose partners, did we lose like engagement, we lost leaders, which is so hard. It's so hard. Like, you can't just, as the president, you can't put the whole chapter on your back, even though as much as we try to do, right? And I think when it came to like the biggest impact to the chapter is that we didn't have enough people to put the energy in to not only come up with the ideas, to come up with the strategy, but to execute the plan to bring more members on. So when it comes to like our organization, which is full of practitioners, it's full of academics, it's full of students, it's full of retirees, like we have a really large and diverse population, even geographically. We have international people who are part of it, which we're very proud of, and who have stayed on throughout the pandemic. Or we're still in it, like, I don't know.
Are we?
Oh, cut that one. I don't know where we stand on that. But a lot of it is around like kind of rebuilding our strategy, to your earlier point, and co-designing, and I've used that word twice, it's like very close to my heart, like making sure that people see themselves in what we're trying to create. So last year, the president that would be sitting in between us, if she was able to make it to the conference, her name is Jenny Ang. She's also a phenomenal leader. And what she really focused on is getting people just back into the vibe of ATD. So we built our board up. We started growing members back again. We did that by really focusing on programming. And so that was virtual programming, in-person programming. That was how do we bring everyone together to just feel that ATD spirit. And then once I took over as president, it was like, okay, how do we refine what we've built here? So it was really structured on what are the 3 things we're going after? How do we actually execute these things? And how do you want to shape the 3 things at the board that we as a now 13-person board coming from a board of 6 that we've decided or that we have really created together. How do you all see yourselves in this? And let's continue to shape it. I think that was your question. But
No, it's actually a great background and context for what I'll ask kind of as a follow-up is then what role do you see, and like has it changed maybe, like how the role that the association plays to practitioners, like as a support system, as a what is that? How would you describe that?
There's a few different ways.
Yeah,
I'm going to give it a go, and then I want to hear your thought on it too.
Yeah.
So I think first and foremost, it's community. Where do you go when your boss calls you up and says, hey, we've never done this before, but I want you to take a crack at creating this strategy? That's where we get a lot of people reaching out to us saying, do you know anyone that's an expert in this? Or has anyone dealt with the same issue? We have over 200 members right now. I'm sure someone has. So how can we connect you to that person?
Yeah.
So community is one. Next is how do we help lift the other L&D businesses and connect them to our community? For instance, there was a point just recently where we finally had budget, which is a very unusual thing in learning and development, to find vendors to help build our leadership development programs and to increase the impact of them. And at one point, it was like that meme where I don't know, I was looking around, I was like, oh my God, where do I go? I don't know who to even reach out to.
Yeah.
So it's also connecting those industry leaders especially headquartered in New York, but globally, to our community so that they can go to their managers or go to their company with a proposal and say, hey, I have all these great connections. I am super valuable to the organization, and this is why. So I'd say those are the 2 really, really big ones. And then, of course, giving back to our community. Something we're looking at right now is how do we integrate with universities, especially we have great universities around us. We have Columbia, we have NYU, we have Baruch, we have Pace, all of them.
Yeah.
How do we connect with those universities to help those students land really softly into the L&D workspace?
Yeah.
Help get them jobs, help them, let's get them on board, sooner than graduation. So that's what I would say. What would you add? Or
No, I agree 100%. It's when you join an association, a trade association, you do it for, I need a job, I need to network, I need to learn. To me, those are the 3 main things.
Yeah.
And during COVID, she's right, I played 3 roles. And people came and said, what happened to ATD NYC? You used to produce, all these programs, and we don't have the infrastructure to do it.
Yeah.
So I made the decision that we were going to scale back on our programs, and that definitely impacted things. And we focused more on communication during that time and newsletters and social media outreach. I was losing people left and right on the board, and my role became triaging and calling everybody. How are you doing? Are you feeling okay? Are you being overworked?
Got toilet paper?
Please don't leave. Please don't leave. You're doing a really good job. I love you. And it was hard. But that's also a strength of mine to have those relationships and have those authentic conversations. But people look at ATD New York City as a preeminent leader, and we are now able to garner interest from those big names that want to sponsor with us because of our membership. And like Callan said, now people can go to a program and talk to somebody from Microsoft, or we don't have Microsoft yet, but maybe we will, from Google. I'm just being aspirational, but and make those connections. And what I love is I come from a different background, so I was part of a different association in the event planning world. Yeah. There's such a different culture. There's not a competitiveness. everybody's willing to talk to you and share their learnings, and you can talk to a C-suite person, and you might be someone who's still in college, and they just meet you where they are.
Yeah, that's very true about this community. You're right. And so the event planning one wasn't like that? Yeah.
There was competition and like, I don't know. It was
Infighting and interesting.
Yeah, it was a little. I mean, as a whole, the event industry is amazing. It just my experience with the association, and I was on the board for that as well. Yeah,
interesting. Okay, so a big part of all of this that we've been talking about is creating experiences for members, right, and moments, right? And I want to get into that aspect of leadership development and learning. And so what you share in common is you're both in the travel industry, and your guest experience is a huge part of that. And I'd love to kind of hear from both of you how that thinking has influenced the guest experience, right? And just optimizing that has influenced the way you design learning experiences and maybe even member experiences for ATD. Callan, do you want to start?
Oh my gosh, I love this question. Yes. So to give a little background on like kind of my career. So I started off, and I didn't know that I was going to go into leadership development or learning development. I started off at PepsiCo in supply chain management, managing a team, which is where I got the leadership bug of like, okay, I feel like I'm doing some things like, okay, some things I'm totally crashing on. How do I get the support? Then moved into the sales side of the organization at Expedia, which is a company that I am like so enamored with. I've been with them almost 7 years and just love what they represent, what they stand for. The industry is just phenomenal. But when it comes to like experiences, so when I was on the sales side of the company, which is really like actually knocking on, bulletproof windows of like motels, it was going to Alaska and like asking, little huts if they'd like to join Expedia. It was wild. I was like, am I getting paid to do this? Also, this is crazy. It was really looking at like, what does a guest experience when they walk through the door? And it's really interesting because actually on this trip, one of our other board members who is our VP of programming was talking about like what makes travel experiences super impactful for her. And when I recently moved to New York, my partner and I, like whenever we're having tough days, because New York can be tough sometimes, we'll be like, okay, we really want to manifest some New York magic here. And it seems like whenever we say that as we walk out the door, something spectacular happens. Like we sit down at a bar and someone buys you a shot, which also does not usually happen in New York, or like you make your train or something like that. And as we were talking to Deborah, who's on our board, she was like, yeah, do you ever get that during like in vacation mode? And we're like, yeah. And she's like, I like to call those vacation fairies. And it's those people that like these experiences that surprise you, that delight you, that make like turn the trajectory of your trip, that make things super spectacular. And that's exactly what we try to create at Expedia, right? Where it's like, how can we put you in a place to where you have a spectacular experience and makes you want to come back? From an Expedia, Verbo, we like our entire portfolio. We try to just make like the very like annoying maybe admin things like finding your hotel easy. So I think from a guest experience in travel, that's what we look at. When it looks at like leadership development and powerful experiences, which I think we'll talk about in just a minute. And with ATD, it's like, how do we create powerful experiences for people that wow them, that delight them, that maybe challenge them, make them learn something about themselves that maybe scares them a little bit, or like shakes them up and say, wow, I do really need to focus in this area, or I see value in this experience, this community. So I think that's kind of where the connection goes within travel, within experience, within L&D, sales, like guest experience and travel fairies.
I love that. You focus a lot on guests at Spirits, right? So what would you add to that?
That's the name of my team, Guest Care, actually. And I do a different type of training. It's the contact centers, and they're international. And the thing about Spirit is we're a low-cost carrier, and we enable people that maybe couldn't afford to travel to actually get on a plane. It used to be a luxury to be able to fly, right? If you had to have a lot of money. So a lot of our guests, we call them guests, not customers, are people that are flying for the first time. So that's one thing. And that actually goes into our training. We really try to train our agents to understand the different personas that fly with us, and take them through the entire journey of the guest and try to be more empathetic, right? Because let's face it, travel is stressful.
Extremely.
I am very anxious when I'm about to fly. Like, am I going to get stuck in traffic and I'm going to miss my plane? Is the Uber going to get in an accident? Is the plane going to be delayed? Is the flight going to be canceled?
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, like, it's so stressful. And so these poor agents get on the phone and you have no idea what you're going to have on the other end of the line. So I train them to try to think about how they feel when they travel. And some of them have never flown, and that's okay. But so then I'll say, well, have you been on a bus? How do you drive a car? Like, try to get them to understand. And, have you ever been late to something or missed something really important to you? Because sometimes someone's flight is canceled and they miss a wedding or a family reunion or something really important to them. And a lot of those emotions come up when you're answering the phone, when you're responding to text messages, social media posts. So that is a big part of my training. And then and the delivery of that training. And we have them listen to calls. We have them look at chats and text messages. We want them to see the types of things and be prepared. But listen, we can never prepare them for everything because they're humans. But
what I think
try.
Something that you're bringing up that's super interesting is, having to facilitate or having to train someone on something that they've never experienced.
Yeah.
And what it sounds like that you're really great at doing is like storytelling, right? Like, imagine that you're in this here. If you've never been on a plane, let's put you in this, into this experience, right?
Yeah.
That stood out to me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a key part of it, and giving people ways to hook into what they do know, right? Like, have you been on a bus before? Like that prior knowledge activation. I want to go to, you both have kind of alluded to this idea of understanding personas and really like immersing in the person. Like, so let's talk about this through the context of L&D practitioners. You're creating experiences for leaders, learners, whatever the case is. What's challenging about understanding those personas? What makes it difficult?
I think the first thing that comes to mind when it comes to like developing personas for like leaders, right? Especially when you start looking at like the C-suite level or even like senior leadership level, the roles very much change. Like, what is this person being brought in to do? How has their manager brought them on? Like, what is the mental state of this person, and what are the challenges that they are trying to solve at the moment? The higher up you go, the more niche they get. And so as like a leader, like a practitioner, when you're trying to put together like a program, we know that cohort and peer learning is one of the most impactful ways to learn. How do you combine everyone and take all these different personas and put together a really impactful and like, mind-rocking experience for all of these different people who are going through very different things? Usually it happens, like, you hope beautiful sparks of like light bulb moments come out of it, but sometimes it can totally fail. And people are like, I don't understand the purpose of this. I don't see how we connect. At Expedia, what we're really trying to do now, and I know a lot of other organizations too, is especially tech organizations, we're really good at hiring people who are really good in their field, their functional field. Like, we get people from Microsoft, from Google, from all these different places, but really looking at how can we make enterprise leaders versus functional leaders. So even if you are data and AI, you need to understand someone like me 5 years ago knocking on doors and asking to join Expedia. And how do we get them to do that? So when I think about the other side of this question, persona of like travelers, one thing that we're actually doing, one of our upcoming programs, is this idea of like a traveler's journey. So we're asking all of our senior leaders to step into the life of someone who maybe uses a wheelchair. How someone who is a Black traveler or an LGBTQ traveler, and what do they experience, and how do they interact with the hotels that we're putting on our sites? So I think there's different kind of persona ways to look at that. That's where my mind went.
I love that. I just want, like, because you got me onto the Heath Brothers book, The Power of Moments, which I now went and bought all 3 of their books, and I'm
so good.
So So that's next in the line. But yeah, I kind of explored that idea, and in it came up, I found this case study of USAA, which I feel like is close to what you're referencing here. They have an onboarding program that it exposes people to what it's like to be a military family. And like, that's a big part of their new hire onboarding, and it's such a big part of their culture, obviously. Is that, like, were you inspired by, is it that kind of thing you're trying to get across there?
Yeah, that's what we were trying to elicit.
Yeah.
That type of emotion that, after they have this learning, this aha moment, maybe they don't know what to do with that emotion or that aha moment right then or there. But when they're completed with the program, they go back to regular day, they're making decisions about like AI or what feature to implement. Is there a way that we could, even if it costs like $1 million, what impact would it have to put like a certain tick box or a way for different travelers to be able to customize the way that they use our site? So yeah, it's about deepening that understanding of our business. So not only like business acumen, but also they probably will need to work with the marketing team. They'll need to work with like, different aspects of the tech team. So how can we create those experiences for them to continue to draw upon after the experience is over?
Yeah, because like you can't prescribe like to someone in a linear way, like this is what you need to do in every situation, because it's always different in every situation. You want people to be adaptable and be able to respond to that change, and it feels like that approach helps with that, because you're giving people so many different perspectives to then take into account in making the decisions, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think what my final comment on it that I always go back to, and it was actually an ATD event that we put on, and we brought in a professor who was a practitioner and a professor on AI. And the big question for like talent development professionals was like, okay, we don't own a budget. We usually don't hold a budget to deal with bringing in any type of AI to our company. That's a huge impact. So how would we get our leaders on board to use it? And he said, very simple words, you can't tell someone, you have to show them. You have to have them experience it. That's the only way they'll really learn. And so to your point, like you can't tell someone about somebody's wheelchair experience. You have to have them experience it.
Yeah. How's that showing up? Like, how are you trying to recreate that guest care moment for people?
We definitely are scenario based in that aspect, and tried similarly what I was saying before. A lot of our agents are very young, and some of our guests are not. So that's relating to, think of your parent, your grandparent. And then something Callan said reminded me that when we do our training on disability, we actually have sections where they can actually simulate different vision impairment.
Oh, wow.
So that, and we say, give me a famous address that like maybe they'll choose like their office, wherever the site's located, and I'll punch in the address and I'll change the dial to like someone with cataracts, all the way to someone who's legally blind, and you see what they have to experience and all of the things that we have to do to try to give them the most equal travel experience to somebody that doesn't have that challenge. So to really get that appreciation, and again, I'm glad you said it, because I'm really big on storytelling, and I'll create a scenario for them, and I often have agents will raise their hand and say, oh yeah, I helped my grandfather fill out the service animal form, and and this person, he needs a wheelchair, and this, that, and stuff that a lot of us take for granted. You don't even kind of notice it, right? It's not in your focus until it is, until it has to be.
Yeah.
So it's, how do you make it relevant? How do you make it stick? And not something that's just going to flow in and flow out of your head.
Yeah, and how, that's another tricky part about all this, is that you can't like give people all the things for all the scenarios like all the time, right? So you have to also like prioritize some of these things. Like how do you think through that? Like what are the most important, guest principles that we need to get across? And how do you go through that prioritization?
That's a good one. How do you go through it? Well, I think if we're talking people with challenges, we have statistics, so the industry has so many stats, so we know what are the most common needs of people that are flying, and that's wheelchair assistance from curb to curb. That is
a big one,
a huge one.
Yeah.
So to understand and be able to educate our guests in what they need to do, that has to happen. Like that has to happen. And we are lucky because we're so heavily stats based. Our calls are recorded, our chats are recorded, everything's got a transcript, and we have a whole quality team that's constantly looking through it to understand what's going on with our guests, what are their needs, what are they happy with, what are they not as happy with. And that's what makes us agile. We can change very quickly as a result.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna come back to, because I think this is also good what you were sharing here. Like a lot of that is focusing on the human at the center of it, right? And we talked about when we were prepping human-centered leadership. I'm gonna bookmark that and come back to that thought. But I want to come back to also the power of moments, because that's also relevant here. Like there's so much of what you're describing and what I'm driving towards is this idea of like creating moments and experiences for leaders to then go on a kind of a journey of self-discovery, right? As opposed to like we're going to shove something down their throats. Like we're going to give them everything that they need to know and then get them to experience it and see like for themselves why this is important. And then, okay, what are the gaps in my knowledge and skills? And then, then they can go and fill those. And then it's like intrinsically motivated as well, right?
Yeah.
And you really got me onto this idea of the power of moments. It's stumbling over the truth, right? And this idea, like how has that idea captured your imagination, and how are you trying to apply it?
It's captured my imagination in just about every way possible. That book like truly changed my perspective on like the world. I know that's so dramatic, but it really is. It changed my life. It did.
Yeah.
Everywhere from like the way I plan my vacations to like date nights to.
Can you give me an example?
Yeah. So my dad just recently retired. And yeah, he was like, it's kind of like a slow, steady retirement. We're from the Midwest. So like, do you ever really retire? No, he doesn't ever want to retire. But it was one of those things where like, what do you get someone that he doesn't like parties, he's kind of to himself, man, he's social, but it's like, how do we celebrate this really awesome moment and milestone? Okay, we could throw a party. So of course I was in talks with my mom, like, should we invite some of his friends and like have a surprise party? Mom was like, oh, I don't know.
Not his thing.
Yeah, not really his thing. I honestly don't even know how he'd react to that, which is actually one of the elements of, Dan and Chip Heath's book is like the element of surprise, but I didn't want to pull that card out on him. But really thinking about like, what is something that would be so impactful and like really deep and meaningful to him. And so I landed on the idea after reading this book of sending him a bottle of whiskey with like a very personalized note and having it like have my mom put it in a special place where he would just stumble over it. And he got it. It was really, really impactful for him because he wasn't expecting it, right? So there's the thing about not expecting it.
Yeah.
I also don't think he really had a chance to process the transition, which is another thing that Dan and Chip talk about quite a bit. And I know in a lot of companies, transitions are not handled well, whether it be transitions of promotion, whether it be transitions of exiting a company, whether it be transitions of, reorganizing a company. When do we give people time to actually process the weight, whether it be positive or negative, the weight of a moment of transition? And so that's what this like bottle of whiskey, which he loves, bottle of whiskey with like a handwritten note of like what I've seen him accomplish in his career was. Yeah, that's what it was for him. Yeah, so it was super impactful awesome. For him. And he came back and he was like, wow, I had no idea. And like, as you see, I'm like kind of, my voice is breaking a little bit.
Yeah, that's really special because it's also like, there's nothing elaborate to that. That was just thoughtful and simple and like impactful.
Yeah.
Which is really cool. And I guess the lesson to draw from this is that it's highly personalized, right? It was like something you thought through. It created that moment for him, which is also like a recognition of like we're in such a busy world, right? There's stuff happening all the time. Like no one's taking that time to sit and think, and just giving that note and that gift gives that permission. Yeah.
And I think to your original point about tripping over the truth, like this is something that's coming. Retirement is like the same as death. Like it's definitely coming for people who are able to make it, which is a privilege.
Breathing when you die.
Yeah, I guess
it's a little different.
A little different, but it is yes, yeah. But like that was something that made him actually face the truth that like his career was coming, had ended, and he had made that decision. So I think that's one of their, if anyone reads the book, which I highly recommend it, I've read it probably 3 or 4 times since, just as like an experienced designer. That's one of the really impactful ones.
And so what are you, and have you had time yet to implement anything at Expedia?
Yes, I have. Oh my gosh, right off the bat. And I love talking about this.
Oh my God.
I know, sorry, I didn't mean to clap into that.
No, this is great.
You're getting too pumped. So really simply, it was like, after I read the book, how can I implement some of these things? At the time, I was redesigning our new manager program. So people who become managers, we're kind of like plop them in. We're like, hey, you got a team now. What are we doing next? Which we've now since then built infrastructure around that. But we realized that some of our programming was a little bit blah. Like it's followed the same equation, which is the other piece from this book. Now, like I should be getting paid for this, honestly.
Definitely should.
Like I'm no commissions here. Is about this idea of like breaking the script.
Yeah.
Right? So things that you expect to happen. Yeah. How can you do a little pivot, right? A little quick step. And the way that usually in-person sessions go, it's like, okay, 2 days, you show up, there's breakfast, you have a session, lunch, like there's some workouts. Some like breakout sessions. It can be impactful, but it can be very like monotonous. Formulaic. People know it's coming. Right. So we decided to implement a button called the Expedia button. And we bought little buttons like that was easy buttons from Amazon or whatever. And we built an activity around it. And the activity was where, okay, we're going to take this button and we're going to introduce it to each of the sessions at the very beginning. We're going to put it right in the middle. There's probably about 20 people per session, long table. We'll say, hey, this is the EG button. This button, when you press it, you will have, starting at $500, you will be able to win. You don't know what the activity is. We're not going to tell you. You only find out once you press the button. But in order to press the button, everyone has to be in agreement at the table, all 20 of you, which is one of our agreements, our like mission statements our values at Expedia, which is include consciously. So how can you make sure everyone's voice is heard? Then there were like different ways that we kind of integrated all of our values. And once they pressed the button, as the time we went on throughout the experience, they would have the number of the money would drop. So 500, 400, 300. And once they press it, they would have to get up and have to do the leadership kind of activity. And so this idea of surprise, which comes from the book, it comes from tripping over the truth, all of these things that are outlined in the book, super easy to implement, has really skyrocketed our satisfaction scores. I think at the moment, it's sitting at an 8.9 out of 10, which is one of the highest that our company has ever had, right? And over 300 people plus have gone through it. So that was a super way, like easy implemented way to bring that book to life. And we're excited to continue doing it. We're just testing. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you later, like to maybe let's have a brainstorm of like what other things you want to be trying around that. But I'd love to hear, like, if does this jog anything for you that you have tried or might want to try?
Well, for the board, for bringing it to ATD, if I could.
Yeah, of course.
I would start chapter board meetings with what I called humaning. And I did that because as a trainer, I know that people aren't always as psyched to get into training as I was. And a lot of times they were basically voluntold they have to be in a training and they would cut out of a meeting or something. So they weren't 100% focused. And the same thing for our board members who were volunteers after a day's work or with childcare or whatever they were going through that day. That stuff lingers in your head, and that's human. That's what happens to us. So I wanted to give people that chance, and I do that in my training as well. Like, okay, take the very first minutes at work. What I do is say, take the next like few minutes to get a drink, to clear your head, to stretch, to finish that email, whatever you have to do, because when you're here, I want you to be selfish. I want you to be focused. This is your time. And with the board, it was a little deeper. It was more like, what's going on? Does anybody want to share what's on their brain right now to clear your head, basically? And I was usually the first one to do it.
Someone has to start.
Yeah, but And I thought, or my attempt was also to bring us closer as a group, because we were 100% virtual, and everybody wants to show up and be all professional, but come on, let's be people. And some people shared, some people didn't. It was totally optional, but there was a selfish side of it for me, because I wanted you to be present and be as present as you could during the board meeting. So get whatever's going on out, and then let's have our meeting.
Yeah.
And I do that in training too, although I don't give them, I have a very short window of time, so I kind of give them more guardrails about how to do that.
We still do it to this day, too.
Oh, you do?
I call it the Jen Jakovsky special.
Oh, there
I
you
do.
go.
Yeah.
Really? That's
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah, I mean, and when we create a moment, right? Because like you don't know what's going to happen in that, because people are being honest, real, vulnerable, like, outside of the playbook of what normally happens in meetings like that. Yeah. So like human-centered leadership is a big thing for you. Like you mentioned that a few times. You baked that into a lot of what you do. When we were talking beforehand, you were talking about simple skills like listening, plain speaking. I love that you brought that one up. It's like that's not many people talk about that. Just saying things simply. Like how do you? Yeah, I guess how do you emphasize those kind of skills in the work that you have to do?
I don't even have a choice. Well, I would probably fail if I didn't, because I deal with a multicultural group. So I ask a lot of questions, because I'm not an expert in the different cultures that I'm working with, but I'm a listener and I'm a learner. And there are people that I deal with in the Philippines who are very literal. So I have to be very literal. I can't assume that they're connecting the dots.
Yeah.
And then there are people that I deal with in Jamaica, and there are people that I deal with in Colombia, and I have to adapt to all of them. And it's interesting. So it's taught me a lot about what people need, and asking questions, and getting to know them personally. They're like, why do you want our cameras on? So everything that I do is virtual for the most part, unless we're launching a new site. And a lot of our learners are introverts, and they don't want to be on camera. And I will say to them, first of all, I don't want to stare at my own face all day. That's just terrible. And secondly, I need to know when your eyes are glazing over, because I'm not going to keep speaking.
Yeah.
And that's human. You're going to get tired. There's so much I have to get out to you that I want to make sticky, that the more you're like this, like when I start training, I say there's 2 rules: no snoring and no choking.
Yeah.
So you can drink and you can eat, but you can't snore.
Yeah.
And when I see them getting sleepy, I will like, all right, stop, let's stretch. When I used to do in-person training, I used to do martial arts. So I would get them up and I would be like, let's do it, let's do it. And they were like,
what is
but then they got into it.
Yeah.
And in in-person training, I would tell them you could stand up, you could lie on the floor. Again, no snoring. Like, you do what you need to do to stay focused.
Yeah, exactly.
And I can say that because I'm a student constantly in ATD. Like, we're sitting in a conference.
You need to sometimes get up and walk around.
Oh my God. You want to
Totally.
be selfish. Do what you need to do to stay focused. And if you're thinking about what you're going to have for lunch, and that's the other thing I say to them, listen, your mind's going to wander. I get that. It happens. But if I'm calling on you to answer a question, don't fake it. Just ask me to repeat it.
Yeah. What I love about this is just sort of setting the like rules of engagement, right? Which is so important to do up front. Also, what strikes me about like how you've learned to adapt your own style to Colombia and Jamaica and the Philippines, it reminds me of this idea of like leadership. And Callan, I'd love to hear how you think about this for leaders. Is that when like that idea of self-awareness, like you know that you have to show up in different ways for different people. So if you have 10 different direct reports, you need like 10 different leadership styles, basically, right? How are you approaching that at Expedia?
Yeah, we've approached it a few different ways. So I'm so glad you asked about this, because my little ears were tingling around this. It's a really interesting topic around cultural intelligence, or cultural, like even beyond cultural awareness, because you can be aware, but like, how are you constantly building that cultural intelligence as a leader? How are you showing like inclusive behaviors as a leader? So I can tell you, during the pandemic, we really changed our like L&D strategy of what content we were creating, how we were supporting leaders. One of the things we did do is some pretty in-depth research around moments that matter. I know I keep saying moments, like it's really not even connected, but it is. It's all, it's connected.
Yeah, we're having a moment here.
Yeah.
Sharing a moment.
I know. Moments that matter. So like when you look at a leadership, like a leader's journey, what are the really pinnacle moments where they need support, right? It's not usually when everything's going well. Like it's usually when things are going awry, when someone on their team passes away, when somebody's partner on their team passes away. Like, how do you deal with that? One of the big things we identified, especially at Expedia, being a tech and travel global company, is this idea of multicultural, multi-generational, globally dispersed teams. So that was one of the moments that was like, that we had designed a ton of just content around, and a lot of research went into it. We ended up actually using the Culture Map by Erin Meyer, which
That's
is
a good
spectacular, right?
Well,
So
I have to
good.
add that to my list.
So yeah, it's something I would also read like 1,000 times to pick out something new every time. So Culture Map by Erin Meyer. She's also worked with this company. I don't know who approached who, but I know that they are indeed connected. And the company's called Globe Smart. And so we've invested like in partnership with them to use them to actually help identify, is our entire company, like what is their level of cultural intelligence? How inclusive are they being as leaders? So we've actually used this in a lot of our leadership development programs to help people not only become aware, so cultural awareness, how inclusive does my team see me? Everywhere from some of the questions I actually just got to take it as well, like in the 360 assessment, is what kind of people do you see your leader hanging out with? Do you see them hanging out with the same person? How much talking time, or like does everyone get equal space during meetings to talk? When are the meetings scheduled? Like, are they scheduled in times? We have a huge office in India, and that's a constant issue. Like, how do you get tech teams in India to work with people in Seattle, to work with people in London? Like, how do you pass that baton? So it's something that's very foundational to the way that we're working at Expedia, and what we are really pushing our leaders to prioritize in the way that they interact with their teams.
Yeah. It's awesome, and it's such a like it's a constantly evolving problem and challenge, rather, right?
Yeah.
Because people are changing all the time. Everything's changing, and people are people.
Yeah.
I could tell you the people in India and Colombia, they really like my jokes.
That's
10
great.
out of 10.
Yeah. I mean, I like your jokes as well, so I'm starting to see.
South Africa, check.
Yeah, there you go. Another one. Okay, so I'm going to give you a hypothetical here, and I wanted to see kind of where you'd approach it. So just as a learning leader, as a in that space, you have to choose between prioritizing one thing, and you have to choose between enabling people to lead through change or retaining talent. Where do you focus your efforts? Whoever wants to go first. It's great when there's two of you can kind of pause and think about your answer.
Yeah.
I think enabling people to lead through change, because that's the long game. If they can do that successfully, they're gonna impact the attrition. I think that's part of the problem. We have in a contact center, they're traditionally high attrition, and we have limited abilities of control because they're not our employees. But internally at Spirit, if and anywhere, right? If your leaders are good at change management, it's scary. You were just talking about that. Change is scary. And you can't expect your managers to just be able to know what to do and how to adapt, because different people are going to react differently to it. So if the better you do it, you'll retain your team.
Yeah. Love that.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. I think I was actually thinking about a session that I just sat through earlier today, which is around the five elements of like strong leadership. And one of the things that stood out is that the speaker was saying, when there's a ton of change and there's a lot of volatility, sometimes you think, does my manager even know what they're doing? And she like had this beautiful long pause, and she's like, here's the secret. No, no one knows what's happening when there's ambiguity and there's volatility.
Yeah.
I think if we'd like put a Venn diagram of like the two like most volatile and impactful like industries would be tech and travel. Like change happens so fast from from change in leadership to change in strategy to change in how do we, you know, beat our competitors. And so I think exactly the same with you is like enabling people to navigate ambiguity, really pushing like what can you control here, and you know, focusing your energy on what you can control and forgetting about what you can't. That for us has been something that has led to higher attrition, or higher retention, not to higher retention.
Yeah. I mean, I love it. That has been a consistently similar theme to answering that question. That's one I ask quite a lot on the show. Okay, so last question. I can't believe how the time has flown
so
by.
Sad. Yeah.
I know.
Let's keep going.
I know. We're gonna have to do a round 2. Yeah. A different couch in a different city, probably.
Love it.
What's next for each of you? And you can talk about your professionally, personally, whatever. In your role, your department, yourself. What's next? What are you looking forward to? And what value do you want to embody going into that?
That's a big one. That's a good one. Yeah, you like hitting everyone with that one, don't you?
Yeah.
I can speak.
Sure.
I can speak first. I'd say for ATD, what the next big thing is continuously like growing on our goals that we have, which is, you know, having partnerships with like the large organizations that are industry known. I think continuing to keep our board where it is and grow our membership base, which I think this conference has done really well. There's been a lot of interest in our chapter. So I think that's one thing. And then setting it up for our next president. So Nisha is coming in after. So anyone listening to this podcast, if that's my call to action for you, is if you're interested to look at atdnyc.org. But I think that's one of the big things is continually like building our community and creating powerful experiences and connecting people. Personally, I really love what I'm doing right now. I didn't think I was going to go into L&D. If you would have asked me like graduating college, I was marketing in Spanish. So this is a wild
that's
turn.
another whole tangent of questions that I have, but yeah.
Like not on the bingo card, but here we are. And I think for one of the first times I've looked around, I'm like, wow, I just really love what I'm doing. I love getting up in the morning. So I think continuing, you know, in companies that I feel really, passionate about, which Expedia is absolutely that, building powerful experiences, interacting and making like leaders and workplaces a better place. Personally, I'm getting married. So that's what's really next for me, which is exciting.
Yeah,
thank you.
congrats.
Yeah. And that's that.
Yeah. And the value that you want to embody through all of this?
That one's harder for me.
Yeah. Like first thing I'd say is curiosity, but I feel like that is quite, I'm being a curious lion. You know?
Yeah.
And I'd say, to be honest, like curiosity and playfulness.
Oh, those are like 2 of my answers as well. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Okay. You didn't tell me that. I'm not stealing.
No, I know.
Okay.
That's like, that's awesome. Yeah.
Yes.
Love that. Jen.
For ATD, Callan and I were talking a little bit about this on the way over. I want to help create something that helps with the transitions because we do have a term limit and there's like a brand new board and a ramping up period. And we were talking a bit about the advisor role and past presidents. So I'm now an advisor, but it would be great to make something structured around that where perhaps the chapter presidents come together in a more formal way. And we have that history, we have that legacy that we can help guide and keep steady the ship, basically, because those transitions at the end of the terms are a little bumpy and the handoffs, can be challenging. So how can we make that smoother? And that goes to like onboarding, right? How do you make the onboarding? How do you make the first impression a little bit better, a little bit smoother? For work, I too was not originally in L&D. I was a film major in college. But I was in events for a very long time and loved training my staff in events. How do you put on this amazing experience for a guest? So then I thought, oh my God, there's a job in L&D and training. And I went back to school. And and I haven't looked back. I don't know what's really next for me. I know that I'm missing a little bit of the leadership stuff that I used to do, and but my personality, I have so many. I get bored very easily. So what excites me about Spirit is you can't get bored. There's no way to get bored. So maybe there's growth there. I don't know, but my humor is appreciated, so
Stand up, baby.
that's helpful.
That's
Maybe that I'll be
side gig.
I don't know, but I think I do lead with humor, so that is a value because I feel like life is hard.
Yeah.
And
Amen.
I laugh at myself all the time. I said something to one of our board members recently, and she's like, "I hope you weren't embarrassed." I said, "I very rarely get embarrassed. I laugh at myself all the time.
Yeah.
It's just life's too short. It's just I find the humor in so many things. Like I'm the person in the elevator that's gonna say something like someone's stomach growls, and I'm gonna say something and like
break the ice.
and
that's something that I'm working on. So I appreciate you saying that. Yeah.
Embarrassed? Being embarrassed?
Like laughing at myself, like not being like, I'm like a taskmaster with myself, like perfectionism and that sort of thing. So I'm trying to balance that more with being a little bit more easy going.
You know who else is trying to balance that? Matthew McConaughey.
Really?
He told us this morning.
You see, and
I
I love that you
know.
brought it back to Matthew. Like
Back to Matthew.
Beautiful, beautiful.
All right.
Callan, Jen, thank you both so much for coming to join me on the couch.
was
I had
fun.
so much fun.
Thanks
Yeah,
for
a lot
inviting
of
us.
fun.
It's been great.
Hello. I hope you enjoyed that episode. It's Andrew again with a quick message. If you'd like to support the show, the best way to do that is to leave us ratings and reviews where you listened. If you're on YouTube, hit the like and subscribe buttons and feel free to leave a comment. We love hearing from our listeners and viewers. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, please take the time to give us a rating and leave a review. Once again, we love hearing from our loyal listeners. If you're listening to this on Spotify, please hit the follow button to make sure that you don't miss new episodes as they come out. See you next week for another episode of the Learning Culture Podcast. Thank you for listening.